The Legislative Council is the legislature of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. Under the Basic Law, the Legislative Council is mainly responsible for enacting laws, examining public expenditure, and monitoring the work of the government. The Basic Law also stipulates that the Legislative Council shall be constituted by election. The Sixth Legislative Council is composed of 70 members, with 35 returned by geographical constituencies through direct elections, and the other 35 returned by functional constituencies. At the first meeting of the Sixth Legislative Council, members elected from among themselves a member to the presidency of the Legislative Council. The President of the Sixth Legislative Council is Honourable Andrew Leung Kwan Yun. The Legislative Council normally meets on Wednesdays to conduct its business, which includes posing questions to government officials, scrutinising bills and subsidiary legislation, and debating motions on issues of public concern. Council meetings aside, members of the Legislative Council perform various important functions through a committee system. There are 3 standing committees of the Legislative Council, namely the Finance Committee, the Public Accounts Committee, and the Committee on Members' Interests. These committees, by virtue of the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance, may summon any person to give evidence or to produce documents. Other committees include the House Committee, which makes preparations for council meetings, the Committee on Rules of Procedure, which reviews the rules of procedure, panels which monitor and examine government policies, and bills committees which consider the general merits and the detailed provisions of bills. In Hong Kong, the enactment of new legislation and the amendment to or repeal of existing legislation are subject to the scrutiny and approval of the Legislative Council. Both the government and members of the Legislative Council may introduce bills into the Legislative Council in accordance with the provisions of the Basic Law. After going through the 3-reading procedure in the lawmaking process, namely first reading, second reading, and third reading, a bill may take effect only after it is signed by the Chief Executive and published in the Gazette. Under the Basic Law, laws enacted by the Legislative Council must be reported by the Government of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region to the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress for the record. Members of the Legislative Council are returned by election. They represent the public to monitor the work of the Government of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. The Chief Executive delivers the policy address in the Legislative Council every year to outline the policy objectives for the coming year. Members then receive public officers' briefings on and discuss the areas of the policy address that come under the portfolio of respective panels. At a subsequent council meeting, members give their views on the policy address and the debate on the motion of thanks. The Chief Executive also regularly attends the question and answer sessions to answer members' questions on government policies. On the other hand, members raise oral and written questions to public officers at council meetings to seek replies or information on the work and policies of the government. Members also propose motions for debate on issues concerning public interests and request public officers to respond. Furthermore, the Legislative Council has established 18 panels to monitor and examine issues relating to different policy areas of the government. Apart from holding regular meetings, panels also conduct local or overseas visits when necessary to obtain first-hand information on and understand practices in certain subject matters to facilitate members' deliberation on policies and issues of wide public concern. The government will consult the relevant panels and seek members' views on major legislative or financial proposals before their formal introduction into the Legislative Council or the Finance Committee. The Legislative Council also has a redress system. Members are on roster to handle complaints from members of the public about government actions or policies. If members consider appropriate, they may ask the government to take remedial actions or refer the issues to the relevant committees for follow-up. Another important function of the Legislative Council is to examine and approve public expenditure to ensure that public funds are used properly. The financial year of the government comes to a close at the end of March every year. Before that, the Financial Secretary introduces into the Legislative Council the Appropriation Bill and the government's estimates of expenditure, and delivers at a council meeting the budget speech outlining the government's budgetary proposals for the coming year. The expenditure proposals in the budget are then referred to the Finance Committee for detailed examination. Following the examination by the Finance Committee, the Appropriation Bill will be considered by the Legislative Council. After the motion for the third reading has been agreed to, the Appropriation Bill becomes a law and the estimates of expenditure are thereupon approved. The Legislative Council of Hong Kong shoulders the important responsibility of performing the functions conferred on it by the Basic Law. To this end, transparency in operation is essential to making the legislature accountable and accessible to people. Council meetings and most of the committee meetings are held in public. The public may watch the live broadcast of the meetings on the website of the Legislative Council or observe the meetings in the Legislative Council complex. The Legislative Council attaches great importance to information dissemination. Documents and records relating to the work of the legislature are available for public access via the website, as well as at the library and archives. To keep pace with time, the Legislative Council also uses mobile application and online platforms to disseminate information so that the public can closely follow the work of the Council. Members of the public are welcome to the Legislative Council complex to join the guided educational tours to savor the history of the Hong Kong legislature, as well as to tour around the facilities in the complex to better understand the operation of the legislature. The work of the Legislative Council is very important and closely related to us. Please continue to support and care about our work.